All right, after President Trump's visit to China ended, before he returned home while he was still in Beijing, he said something to Fox host Bret Baier. There were 2 points he made that were truly shocking. The first point really stunned the Republican Party. What did he mean? Here's what Trump said. If we can't handle Iran, it doesn't matter if we lose the midterm elections. Wow, what's going on here? The second point is that he said Taiwan has stolen America's chip industry and that the chip industry in Taiwan needs to be moved to the United States. I imagine our friends in Taiwan must be furious hearing this. So how should we look at these two issues? Both are highly relevant to the future of the global situation, including the development of the political landscape in the United States. In addition, upon returning from China, Trump immediately took 3 actions. First, striking Nigeria. Second, prepping for conflict with Iran. Third, during his 4 years, as mentioned, the U.S. passed its most vital legislation. Trump kept pushing things forward. So, where exactly has this whirlwind Trump schedule gotten to now? He didn't even take a break over the weekend, because Trump works 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Well, maybe not 24, but at least 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. All right, welcome to listening and watching Good Morning America, brought to you by Feng Wei. Even though it's called Good Morning America, we're actually broadcasting on Saturday afternoon. Also, hello to our friends watching on YouTube and to the listeners of Sound of Hope, Silicon Valley FM 96.1. If this is your first time tuning in to Feng Wen Time, please go ahead and click subscribe now, and while you're at it, turn on the little bell next to it. That way, whenever the news updates in the morning, you'll get a notification and won't miss any important news. And also, for the in-depth analysis that Feng Wen provides behind the news. If you're already a regular viewer, I encourage you to share my program with friends who haven't seen it yet, so that more people in the Chinese community can understand what's really happening behind the news. All right, today's topics are actually pretty significant. Even though it's the weekend, the importance of this news hasn't diminished at all. So let me start with what happened on May 15th. Yesterday, at the Chinese Foreign Ministry's press conference, foreign media bombarded the spokesperson with questions, but the Chinese side pretty much dodged all the key issues. What are the key issues? For example, Trump's visit to China is over. Did Boeing get the big order? Trump said that Xi Jinping had already signed and committed to a big order for 200 planes. Of course, Boeing originally hoped for an order of 500 planes, but now they're talking about 200. So is it really 200 planes? Has that actually been put into practice? No, it hasn't. Has the agricultural purchase been carried out? That hasn't happened either. There's been no rare earth supply so far, so has that been implemented? No, it hasn't. And as for China buying American oil and natural gas, has that happened? No, it hasn't. The easing of restrictions on chips? So is there any of that? We'll talk about it in a bit. Not only is there nothing, but the conclusion is that it's completely crazy. There's just no such thing. What's really going on? I'll explain it to everyone in a moment. Even what Trump wanted, like the release of Jimmy Lai and an American lawyer, there's been no follow-up at all. The only thing that's been confirmed is a statement from the spokesperson of China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs saying that both sides should implement the important consensus reached by the two heads of state. Basically, what that means is that although many things were discussed, nothing has really been settled yet. Meanwhile, on the US side, they've already taken action. They've approved the NVIDIA H200 chips. These aren't NVIDIA's low-end chips, but they're not the top-of-the-line ones either. Let's call them mid-range. The export license for H200 chips to China. But then the Chinese side announced that they don't want them and won't buy them. They announced they're refusing to accept them. Pretty bizarre, right? So after all that, what did Feng Wei and President Trump actually get out of their 3-day, 2-night visit to China after all that effort? Basically, you could say that almost nothing concrete was achieved, so that's the issue here. While Trump was in Beijing, he spoke with a Fox News anchor who was traveling with him, one from Shanghai, from the mainland, and another from Breitbart. In the interview with Breitbart, some really significant information was revealed, and it's definitely worth discussing. Brian Bell asked him, "Do you think this trip was a success?" And if you say it was a success, what does he think was the most important part of that success? Do you know what Trump said? What Trump said is exactly what I told everyone yesterday. He said, "It's my relationship with Xi Jinping. We've maintained our friendship." This relationship means that both sides can avoid conflict. And when Trump went to China, he brought along 16 business leaders and discussed almost every kind of business, but hardly any deals were actually finalized. Most people thought it was a big win, but actually... So when the buyer asked Trump, he used this line, "He was very successful." In my words, like I said yesterday, it was a huge success. So why do I say this? Actually, whether it's the 200 airplanes, soybeans, or the H-200, these are all pretty minor in the context of US-China relations. They can't compare to having a relationship between the two countries that can be managed and controlled. To be precise, it's really about the relationship between Trump and Xi Jinping. In fact, Trump brought so many people with him just to add weight to his visit to China. The goal was to get US-China relations on track. Whether or not the business deals actually go through isn't really that important to Trump. So, what about US China relations? Now, in a sense, they've basically been simplified to a so called good friends relationship between him and Xi Jinping, right? So, since both sides can talk to this extent and can have a dialogue like friends, they can be at Zhang'an High, what do you call it, the ancient part, and point at those two trees that have grown together, just chatting there. So, what does that mean for the future? It means Xi Jinping won't act recklessly toward the US. He's not likely to. It's just like after meeting Kim Jong un 3 times, Kim Jong un stopped conducting nuclear tests and also greatly reduced the number of intercontinental ballistic missile tests. Including the return of US military remains, it's the same idea. So in the future, Xi Jinping won't openly support Iran and Russia, we all know that. But will he secretly provide support? We all know he will, but he won't do it openly. He won't do it on a large scale, and he won't easily invade Taiwan or stir up any other major global incidents. In other words, China and the US won't go to war in the next 2 or 3 years. Trump needs these 2 or 3 years to make America strong again. So, when America truly becomes strong again, the question isn't whether there will be a war, it's that there can't be a war. Strength can bring about peace, just like how the CCP ends up unable to make a move. Speaking of human rights issues, Trump actually set 2 tasks for himself. He wanted to rescue Jimmy Lai and Pastor Kim Ming-il. But in the end, he told Brian Beyer that rescuing Jimmy Lai would be very difficult. He said it was tough, but didn't really give any reasons. He said Jimmy Lai is a nightmare for Xi Jinping. Is Jimmy Lai a hot topic for Xi Jinping? This statement is really hard to fully understand, even if you try your best. But anyway, it's more like Xi Jinping sees Jimmy Lai as a nightmare, right? In any case, he just said that rescuing Jimmy Lai would be very difficult. As for tomorrow or the day after, he said it's possible. That's the situation. So I think basically the message from this interview is very clear. What Trump really values is his relationship with Xi Jinping. And indeed, that relationship has been maintained to a certain extent, with Trump bringing so many people and Xi Jinping putting on such a big show to please Trump. Both sides really do have a stable relationship. So this is a good thing. But at the same time as this stable relationship, you could say that Iran was basically sold out. Because when the two of them get so close, the third party gets really jealous, right? They might even suspect, hey, Xi Jinping, did you sell me out in Beijing? Yeah, that's the situation. So the reason why the spokesperson for Iran's foreign ministry got angry yesterday is related to this. And that's also something Trump gained from this. We already talked about this yesterday. Now, let me see. Let's talk about something else. Let's move on to the next piece of news. For the next piece of news, let's talk about this. During Trump's conversation with Beyer, he said that he would rather lose the midterm elections, okay, as long as he can settle the Iran situation. So in that same interview, what did everyone say and what did Trump say? Trump said that if the Iran issue can't be resolved, oil prices won't come down and the Republican Party might lose the midterm elections. What do you think should be done? This is what Trump said. Trump said Iran cannot have nuclear weapons because not only do they have issues with their thinking, they're a bunch of lunatics. If they get nuclear weapons, they will definitely use them, and the world will be in big trouble. This interpretation is absolutely correct because Iran's faith is an apocalyptic one. They believe that causing devastation across the world is actually their path to heaven, and they feel absolutely no psychological burden about it. Not only do they not feel guilty, they actually pursue that outcome. So to Trump, these people are just lunatics. He said, I have to deal with Iran. When he says deal with Iran, he means dealing with Iran's nuclear ambitions and nuclear program. It doesn't necessarily mean changing Iran's regime, but in the end, it might come down to having to change the regime to really deal with Iran. Yeah, that's the first point. The second point is, Trump said, basically, that for this issue, because of the threat from Iran, we have to take a detour, so everyone has to put up with this. He was very blunt about it. Oil prices will go up, and they'll stay high, but if the issue can be resolved before the midterm elections, then oil prices will drop sharply, even lower than before. But if it isn't resolved by the midterm elections and gets dragged out until after the general election, then if we lose the midterms, so be it. Every president loses the midterm elections. Haven't you noticed? If you've watched my conversation with Tung Jingyan on Dialogue from Afar, then you know I've said this before. Trump just wants to do the right thing and solve long-term threats. He doesn't care about the midterm elections at all. You might ask, why doesn't Trump care about the midterm elections? If he loses the midterms, wouldn't his administration be finished? Wouldn't it be crippled? Western media keeps saying that if he loses the midterms, he'll become a lame duck. What does lame duck mean? It just means a lame duck, someone who can't really do anything. Basically, he wouldn't be able to do anything. But that's not actually the case. If the Republicans lose the midterm elections, it really wouldn't make any difference from now. Seriously, no difference. You know why? Because of one reason, the Senate filibuster. In other words, the filibuster. So any bill that Trump wants to pass, and for any bill that the Democrats don't like, there's no way you'll get those 60 votes, so you can't get past the Senate. So even if you have the House, a simple majority in the Senate, and the presidency, it doesn't matter. Okay, so even if you win both chambers in the midterm elections, you still won't get the 60 votes needed to overcome the filibuster veto. So it's still useless, but you get what I'm saying here. I'm talking about the essence of the matter. This is the reality of how Congress operates in the US today. Of course, you could say it's not completely meaningless because there's something called the Reconciliation Act. This Reconciliation Act is something Congress can only use once a year, and it's basically a budget reconciliation bill, meaning it's for things related to money in the US. Anything related to the budget, spending, or taxes, these kinds of things, can be handled once a year through a reconciliation bill. With this, the Senate can pass the policy using a simple majority. It can become law, but it's only limited to budget matters. It can't help with anything else, like elections or other areas. All the things Trump needed, like tax cuts, funding for the Department of Homeland Security, border funding, deportation of illegal immigrants, and so on, were already accomplished through the 2025 Great America Act and this year's upcoming reconciliation bill. Everything was done in the first 2 years, so there aren't any new policies left to implement. So for the remaining 2 years, there won't be any reconciliation bills, because if you lose the House or lose both chambers, the reconciliation bill can't pass anyway. It's not really important for Trump. So in the end, it doesn't really make a difference. But if you lose the majority or even lose participation, what can the other side do? Actually, the other side can't really do anything either. Because even if the other side holds both chambers, even if they have both chambers, which is very unlikely, they still can't pass any laws since the presidency is in Trump's hands. The only thing is they would have to deal with congressional investigations, hearings, or things like impeachment. If the majority party in Congress calls you in for a hearing, you have to go, but that's just noise. It just takes up some time. Yeah, in the end, things like impeachment or investigations are never going to pass. So just so everyone understands, the midterm elections really aren't that important. Even if the Republican Party really loses, it's not the end of the world. Let me just add one more thing. Even if it really were that important, I think, based on my observation and understanding of Trump, he still wouldn't change the way he does things because of it. Because when Trump does things, he focuses on his main responsibilities and the long term. He doesn't get caught up in wins or losses in a single battle or the outcome of just one election. Trump is actually very principled in the way he does things. That's also, in my opinion, what ultimately allows Trump to win over the hearts of the American people. Including the supporters of both the Democratic and Republican parties in the future, I think he can win their hearts. This is exactly where Trump's conservatism differs from that of European conservatives. As everyone knows, Italy also has conservatives, right? Meloni also understands what conservative principles are, but when faced with domestic elections, she will abandon those principles, or at least sometimes compromise on them, hoping to survive politically. But in the long run, voters will see through you, and you might not be able to last. Everyone can understand this logic, right? When you face this kind of pressure and stick to your principles, it often carries risks in the short term. But in the long run, as the saying goes, distance tests a horse's strength. Time reveals a person's true character, and in the end, you'll earn genuine respect from others. It's just like how we act among friends in our daily lives. Isn't that right? So, everyone, did you notice Trump's attitude toward the midterm elections, as mentioned by Breitbart and Bannon? Isn't it really impressive? He really doesn't care at all. So, should we give him an evaluation? Whether you agree or not, let's all leave a comment, okay? Let's evaluate. All right, next I want to talk about a very, very sensitive topic, which I also think is quite profound. This issue is really deep. During Trump's interview with Breitbart, he made some strong remarks about Taiwan. What did he say? The first thing he said was this. He said Xi Jinping really cares a lot about Taiwan. Maybe when I was president, he didn't dare to attack Taiwan. But if there's a different president, he might actually attack. He said that if Taiwan were to declare independence, it would be really dangerous and could trigger a war. The Taiwan Strait is only 59 miles wide, but from the US to Taiwan, if America wants to come to the rescue from thousands of miles away, the distance is 9,500 miles. Trump said that fighting this war just isn't worth it. That's what he meant. So it's best not to fight, to avoid it as much as possible. That's his first point. When he said this, friends in Taiwan probably felt their hearts jump. Then, the second thing he said was, Trump claimed that Taiwan stole our chips, and now we have to bring them back. Bring them back to the US, and all the related personnel need to move to the US as well. By the time my term ends, which is in 2.5 years, he said that the US chip industry should account for 40 to 50% of the market share in the US. What's Taiwan's takeaway? First, Trump won't allow independence. Second, he claims we steal chips, but have we? What about our massive investment and innovation in the industry? How can he say that? You know, there are even Americans online now speaking up for Taiwan, saying that Taiwan's only mistake was developing a chip industry under a democratic system. What's wrong with that? How can you, President Trump, how can you talk like that? So how should we view what President Trump said earlier? Let me share my personal opinion. This is Feng Wei's commentary now. First of all, the chip industry really is the result of Taiwan's investment and innovation. Starting from Sun Yun-swan, who was the Minister of Economic Affairs and later the Premier, and Li Kuo-ting, known as the godfather of Taiwan's technology sector, their major decisions, and then a whole series of semiconductor pioneers from Taiwan, like Mr. Morris Chang, who trained in the US and then returned directly to Taiwan, as well as others like Kao-sing Chang. That generation truly led the people of Taiwan to collectively create Taiwan's chip industry. As I've mentioned to everyone before, when I visited Taiwan, I met a Taiwanese official who shared his perspective with us. He said that when it comes to the chip industry, just the chip industry alone, Taiwan's chip industry is truly one of a kind in the world. Even Japan and South Korea can't compete with Taiwan's chip industry. It has integrated Taiwan's own unique culture. This includes the loyal and diligent aspects of Chinese culture, and the meticulous and precise operational practices of Japanese culture, along with their systems and processes. Combined with the safeguards of American culture, all of these come together in Taiwan's unique environment, making it possible for Taiwan to become the leader in advanced chip manufacturing processes. Why is it that only Taiwan has this? Why does Taiwan account for 90%? Why can't even Japan and South Korea surpass Taiwan? So Taiwan's contribution here is truly significant. It's something Taiwan can be proud of. That's the first point. Second, however, the entire semiconductor technology and chip intellectual property really do belong to the United States. Whether it's Mr. Cao-sing Chang or Mr. Morris Chang, they are both experts trained in the US. So Mr. Morris Chang was able to freely come to Taiwan and transfer American technology to Taiwan. He benefited from the open policy that the United States has maintained for 80 years since World War II. Not only did this policy allow for the free transfer of technology, but it also made it possible to sell products back to the US without any barriers. So not only can you have the technology, you can also make a lot of money. This is also a fact, right? Therefore, when it comes to technology transfer and import barriers, the US didn't set up any obstacles at all. If the US had set up any kind of barrier, Taiwan's chip industry probably wouldn't have been able to take off at all. The third point is, so the US, for 80 years, it continued the so-called post-war order, which was really about American generosity. This generosity was based on a certain misunderstanding about the world. After being generous for 70 or 80 years, now the US, this is what you'd call entering a period of decline, right? That's why President Trump came onto the scene, seemingly out of nowhere, because he wanted to revitalize America, to make America great again. And one way to revitalize America, of course, is to correct the mistakes of the past. or the excessive generosity of the past. This means putting up tariffs so that foreign companies have to raise their prices to sell in the US. Or you could just move your factories to the US. That works too. In other words, after Trump, America just can't afford to be that generous anymore. So, what is Trump really trying to say? He says that originally all this chip technology was American. It was invented by us, so we should be leading the industry. But because of our past policies, things turned out like this. So Taiwan took our technology. Strictly speaking, of course, it wasn't really stolen, and Trump isn't going to pursue any kind of theft charges because there isn't any theft involved, right? This is just something that naturally happened under the old economic order. When he says stole, he just wants to express an attitude that Trump is really unhappy about this, really unhappy. That's all there is to it. From the American perspective, that's how he sees it. I think everyone should be able to understand, or at least try to understand this. So after Trump took office, in order to make America great again, he didn't want the key link of high-end chips in America's critical supply chain to be under threat from the CCP's artillery, so he wanted to move it away. He really meant what he said. Why? Because he made it very clear. He said these chips from Taiwan need to be moved to the US, and when it comes to these chips, we're talking about a huge number of people. At the very least, it's hundreds of thousands, and at most, it could be millions. Trump actually doesn't like so many immigrants pouring in all of a sudden. The fact that he said this shows that he really sees Xi Jinping as possibly attacking Taiwan in the future. Yeah, really attacking Taiwan. So these chips need to be brought into the US, but they're inventions and creations from Taiwan. Taiwan's economy, its advanced manufacturing processes and precise craftsmanship, so all the related personnel need to come to the US. That's why it's very likely that the doors to immigration will be wide open in this regard. This can be used to infer that the threat from Xi Jinping that Trump heard about is real, that the threat Xi Jinping poses is real in his eyes. So that's the first point, just to say. The reason for relocating is the willingness to accept hundreds of thousands or even millions of Taiwanese immigrants. That's where this comes from. He really sees the threat. Second, Trump can't let the US military face risks and then let the whole United States face risks, or let the US economy face risks. Whether it's Xi Jinping or the Communist Party or whoever it is in the future, if they attack Taiwan, will the US come to Taiwan's aid? If you ask me personally, I'd say the US will absolutely 100% come to Taiwan's aid. No matter who is president, the US will help. However, Trump doesn't want the US military to face the risks of war, while also putting the entire US economy at risk. That's why he's moving people now, moving the chip industry. This is all pre-war preparation, a way to hedge against risk. I don't know what our friends in Taiwan think, but if you really think about it, it makes sense. You know that a key link the entire US and even the world relies on is under threat from the CCP's artillery, and sooner or later, those guns are gonna fire. So are you just gonna ignore that? Isn't it reasonable to move things out first, to relocate before anything happens? So no matter what, should our friends in Taiwan be upset? Should Taiwan be angry? I'd advise our friends in Taiwan not to get upset. Why is that? Well, there are two reasons. The first is that Trump's words may sound harsh, but he only talks like that to real friends. He talks to the UK, France, Germany, and Italy the same way, doesn't he? Yet when he talks to Xi Jinping or Kim Jong-un, he's all sweet talk. He'll say, "You're a good friend." But the people he speaks nicely to are the ones he's actually ruthless with. Right? So when Trump says harsh things to Taiwan, it actually shows that he sees Taiwan as a true friend of the United States. That's just how Trump talks to real friends, especially when he feels a true friend has treated him unfairly. He doesn't care about political correctness or diplomatic language. He just says whatever's on his mind. He's a president of the people. So don't get hung up on what he says. Just listen to see if there's any truth in his words. Actually, a lot of times his words may sound rough, but the reasoning behind them isn't. So to the points he made earlier make sense. If these chips aren't moved, or at the very least backed up somewhere, what happens if a conflict really breaks out in the future, right? What will happen to Taiwan? What about the US? What about the world? That's the first point. So I think when Trump says things that sound harsh, it actually shows he's being a friend. Don't take it too personally. That's the first thing. The second point is, the key issue is, what about Taiwan, right? If Trump acts like this toward you, what's going to happen to Taiwan? First of all, I think Taiwan definitely has to make some concessions. So just have a good talk and really try to reach a win-win outcome. Now, how do you achieve a win-win? Here's my suggestion. Just speaking from afar here, just a scholar's opinion, take it for what it's worth. There's a trick to dealing with Trump. It's to treat him well. If you treat him well, he'll treat you even better. So if you offer him a peach, he'll respond with a show of force. The Chinese Communist Party can only do the opposite, right? If you're nice to him, he thinks you're easy to push around. But if you stand firm, he thinks you're strong. He'll respect you for it. The CCP respects strength. We saw this when Trump visited with a huge delegation. The CCP treated him like the boss and showed total respect. But when NVIDIA's CEO, Jensen Huang, tried showing goodwill by eating street food and drinking doji in Beijing, before leaving Beijing, his H200 was already banned. The CCP sees you, Jensen Huang, as a pushover. Niceties are useless. They only respect strength because the CCP is a mafia that only listens to power. They don't operate by the rules of normal people, or what you'd call normal human interactions. If you treat me well, I'll treat you well. If you treat me badly, I'll treat you badly. That's exactly how Trump is. So even if you show him an inch of respect, he'll give you a mile in return. That's Trump's unique trait. Trump especially likes to protect the weak. So Taiwan can have a good conversation with Trump and be more considerate of him, and he'll look out for you in return. Actually, what I mentioned before about escorting ships through the strait, no one else has done that. If a country sends warships, and if Taiwan had sent some at that time, even if Taiwan was poor, no matter how small the military is, he could still send 1 or 2 ships. That would have been a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, a perfect chance to show him an inch of respect and have him return a mile. But Taiwan didn't do it, right? Of course, I don't have access to the Taiwanese government either. I'm just an intellectual talking about politics, just casually sharing my thoughts.